Welcome to The Plain Truth, a show where we explore some of the mysteries, anomalies, and a bit of the dirty underbelly of the world around us. I'm your host, Plain, and this week we have a special guest, Richard Sauder, who is well known for his work dealing with underground bases and undersea bases and things like that. And along for the ride is my friend Oolong Rabbit. Richard, are you there?
I'm right here.
Sounds good. Well, I guess we could start by just saying I think our audience is likely to know about your work and be interested, but why don't we give them an update on, let's see, your website and books that you've worked on?
Well, my website, actually my blog site, is eventhorizon.blogspot.com. That's eventhorizon.blogspot.com. And of course, I've written a number of short books for the popular market over the last 20 years. The first one was initially about underground bases and tunnels, came out in about 1994, something like that, from Adventures Unlimited Press. And then I had another one also on the underground bases and tunnel theme. They came out, about 8 years later, 2002 or so. In between there, I had Kundalini Tales, which dealt with topics of mind control, alternate realities, of course, the Kundalini, and had quite an extensive appendix dealing with electronic circuits with mind control applications. And then my most recent book, Hidden in Plain Sight, Beyond the X-Files, which is the only one of those four that's currently in print. The others are out of print, and I hope will soon be offered again by one of my current publishers, Richard Dolan Press in Rochester, New York. And then I also have the Richard Sauder Briefing, which came out 3 years ago, and which I believe will be reissued in English later this year, which is a short book meant to be read in one sitting. It covers several different topics dealing with essentially the multiple cover-ups that are used to pull the wool over the eyes of humanity and continue this very fraudulent kind of matrix power structure that is literally lording it over the earth, and from my point of view, actually trying to destroy the earth and the human race with some degree of success in recent years. So those are the books I currently have in print. I'm also working on a couple, 2 or 3 little booklets that I would like to issue in the coming months related to my experiences here in Ecuador, with respect to my excursion into the shamanic realm. I've gone more deeply into shamanism than the vast amount of people do, with the exception of shamans themselves. I came here originally to Ecuador on a vision quest, and I have had many visions such that my view of so-called reality and of what is occurring on this planet has diverged even more from the view that is held by the masses, who I perceive as being in thrall to this huge, very malevolent matrix control structure that is attempting to, at the least, dominate this planet. And if what's happening in Fukushima is any guide, it doesn't mind destroying the biosphere on this planet and just killing a lot of the biological life forms on this planet outright, perhaps including most or all of the human race itself.
Well, that's a lot to chew on. So this gets to your idea of kind of a machine force that's more or less in charge of Earth, or seems to act like it is. Do you think that machine has been around forever, or is this a more recent phenomenon?
I don't know how long it's been around. My guess is that it has been on this planet for many thousands of years. I don't know how long. My guess would be at least 5 or 10,000 years, and perhaps a very great deal um, longer than that. I don't think it actually rules this planet. I think the ultimate ruler of this planet is the creator of the universe. However, the machine, from my perspective, has set itself up against the agenda, creative agenda of the universal creator, if you will. Why it has done this, exactly how it has done this, I don't know. From my perspective, from what I've seen, the machine doesn't really have a spirit or a soul as many human beings would perceive it. However, uh, it evidently does perceive that humans do have this higher spiritual nature, and it seeks to, for that reason, to appropriate human energy. I've thought of it in this way in an analogous manner to the Tin Man in the Wizard of Oz movie. The Tin Man didn't have a heart, and he desperately wanted one. He observed that Dorothy had a heart, for example, and other living biological beings had hearts, and he desperately wanted what he didn't have. As a Tin Man, he was essentially a robot, a machine. The movie was made years before we have the types of robots that exist today, but it was clearly anticipating some of the technology we have today. And so the Tin Man, in that respect, was the mechanical man, the machine man. He wanted a heart. He knew he didn't have one. He saw that Dorothy had one, for example. And from my perspective, the machine sees that it doesn't have these higher spiritual faculties. But I did see, from what ayahuasca showed me, that the machine does have uh, uh, an area of activity in the near spiritual dimension, what we would call the astral realm, and it sucks off human energy and human life energy, human life essence, as a type of fuel or energy source. And what it does with that energy, or life essence, I don't know. I didn't see, but I did see it sucking it off right through the top of people's heads, through their crown chakra, is what it seemed like to me. It actually has kind of like a suction device. And this takes place in the astral realm. You would not physically see this, but when you're in a visionary state, as you enter with ayahuasca, ayahuasca shows you what's happening around you, the spiritual dimensions, kind of the meta reality of the physical reality. They're not actually two different realities. They're two aspects of a spectrum of reality, of a continuum, a reality continuum. And what ayahuasca does is show you all of it, or at least a larger slice of it, so that you can kind of overlay the spiritual dimension on top of the physical dimension, if you're open to that. Now, some people drink ayahuasca and they freak out because of their own inner baggage. I'm not saying I can't freak out. I'm simply saying that I've drunk ayahuasca a lot of times and I never have. I've rather just more or less calmly observed what ayahuasca has presented to me, and it was very eye-opening and very sobering.
I think Castaneda talks about the energy suckers. I think he calls them the flyers or something like that.
Could
supposedly, yeah, like a black astral entity that attaches itself to the top of people's heads and siphons their life force or energy. So yeah, it must be a common vision that people see.
It's a similar concept. That's not exactly what I saw. What I saw was more detailed, and I believe I actually saw the if you will, astral machinery behind this. It appeared to be very organized, and I also observed that quite a lot of people just give themselves over to this. It seems, for whatever, for fame, for money, for power, for influence, for whatever, for a brass nameplate on their office door, for a stenciled parking lot space, for free dental, free medical. A lot of people sell themselves for all kinds of things at a real fundamental level, or for a security clearance, or just for the sense of, gee, I belong. Isn't this exciting? I'm on the inside. I'm one of them. And a lot of people have a great emptiness inside, which they try to fill up with anything that will scratch that itch. The machine, from what I was shown, very adroitly manipulates people and uses this. The machine knows this because it understands. It's a keen observer of human psychology, and pushes people's buttons. You want a red Ferrari that'll go 130 miles per hour? Hey, you can have that. You just have to do what I want you to do. Now, you may have to build a nuclear power plant that'll blow up in 50 years and exterminate half of the biological life forms on the planet, but you can have your Ferrari.
Yeah, another thing it raises, I don't know if you're familiar with Rudolf Steiner and his work.
I've read some of Rudolf Steiner's stuff.
Yeah, it almost also sounds like what you're describing is what he called the Ahrimanic entity. I think he basically said there's two different forces of evil, for lack of a better word. One was Ahrimanic, which was sort of a technological intention, versus the Luciferic one, which was more of a drive towards a spiritual lust for power.
Yes. Well, I am not a student of Steiner's, but I have read some of his stuff, and yeah, I believe that there's validity in his observations. As far as that goes, what I saw definitely had a kind of an artificial intelligence or machine-like feel to it, and motivation. It's I'll tell you this: it's powerful. It's not small. It's relentless. It will not stop coming. It does not get tired. It never abandons its mission, so to speak. It just goes and goes and goes. And from its perspective, it seems to use anyone and anything that it can. It's cunning, it's wily, it's subtle, at the same time that it has a planet-conquering, planet-destroying capability. It's not a simple thing. It's big, it's powerful, it knows what it wants, and it just does not stop.
Maybe to link this in with some of your other work on the bases, I know.
Well, I think the NSA, what the NSA is doing dovetails very well with the machine's mission. From what I saw, the machine absolutely will foment the formation of agencies like the NSA, like the Pentagon, like the CIA, like the Federal Reserve Bank, like the Catholic Church, etc., etc., to come onto a planet and just conquer it, up, down, and sideways.
What about, are you familiar with some of the theories that there's possibly like an alien, maybe not even alien, but some type of base on the moon? Have you come across that in your research?
Well, yes, and I think it does exist. What I can tell you is that, and by the way, the moon ties in with this very well, because it appears the moon hasn't always been in orbit around the Earth. My conversations, my research, my reading, as well as my intuition, lead me to think that the moon was driven here or brought here from elsewhere in the galaxy. I don't know how long ago that was. I would guess at least several thousand years ago, and maybe tens or even, 100,000 years ago. I don't know, but it's certainly been many thousands. And the moon is a peculiar body, as are the moons of Mars, as is Iapetus, one of the moons of Saturn. Our moon is not the only anomalous moon, so to speak, in this solar system. There are more than one. There's more than one anomalous moons. And our moon is one of them because it's closest to our planet. Of course, it interests us the most. Jerry Freelix, who's one of my readers, contacted me a couple of years ago, and he was taken out of the body years ago. He was in the military in Vietnam and was taken over the border. I believe he was in either Cambodia or Thailand. Thailand, I guess it was. And the American military was flying bombing missions out of Thailand and bombing, I think, in Laos and Cambodia. It was illegal. But when has that ever stopped the Pentagon? Anyway, he had a very powerful out-of-body experience while he was there. He actually seemed to have died, which was very unexpected for him, since he was a young man at the time. And he was taken out of his body and taken on a very conscious grand tour of the solar system by two of his spiritual guides. It was all extremely vivid for him, more vivid than everyday, so-called everyday reality. And one of the places he was taken was to the moon. What he was shown was that there are vast caverns beneath the moon's surface, vast caverns that are miles high and miles, just miles long, mile after mile. Inside these caverns, he was shown enormous machinery that just dwarfs any machinery on Earth. The machines themselves seemed to be miles long and miles high. They were enormous, they were complex, and he could not understand them. They were just bizarre. However, you know, there's an echo of this in the esoteric teachings of the Russian philosopher and his student Gurdjieff, and then his student's name P.T. Uspensky, and they both mentioned decades ago, back in the early 20th century, that the moon has an esoteric function in that when people die, their spirits go to the moon, their souls go to the moon, and the moon does something with human souls. Gurdjieff actually said that the moon eats people's souls when they die. Now, Jerry Freelix was told by his spiritual guides not that the moon eats people's souls, however, that when people die, their souls go to the moon and they're processed. The moon seems to be like a triage center for sorting souls and then slotting them into different categories and sending them on elsewhere, perhaps back to Earth. So the moon is a very peculiar place, and there appears to be a very powerful agenda being carried out on the moon that we're not being told about. It could be at the higher levels, the Freemasons know something about this. NASA was a great mania to go to the moon. NASA went to the moon several times and then all of a sudden announced that it would not go anymore and just pulled the plug on the man-moon program, at least publicly. So the moon is a very strange place. I might add that in my underground bases research, I did run across a number of articles and studies in the scientific and engineering literature and the mining literature that forthrightly discussed establishing bases on the moon and also on Mars for the purposes of mining minerals and then exporting the minerals back to Earth. I am guessing that is going on right now. That there, I would give odds better than 50% without being able to prove it. This is just my best guess, is that there are secret mining bases on the moon and possibly on Mars as well. Now, what would be the mode of going there? Well, I would put the black triangles high on the list. I assume that the military-industrial complex has developed these black triangles decades ago already and are secretly flying them at least around the inner solar system and perhaps further afield. I can't prove that either, but that's just my guess based on the sum of what I have seen, read, and been told.
Yeah.
You
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Plain.
do you think you know, in the United States or Britain or whatever, people with night vision goggles see, you know, tremendous activity in the skies at night with things that look like they're from Star Trek or Star Wars. And you know, they see them including in cities. In other words, it's not just like in the middle of nowhere in New Mexico. They see them in Portland, Oregon all the time. And so one gets the feeling that these are just part of the black budget system. And I'm wondering, are there any reports, for example, where you are in Ecuador, or let's say the non-NATO world? Do you get the view that there's this kind of activity at night?
Well, I haven't observed it myself here in Ecuador, but then I don't have night vision goggles. I really haven't heard people discussing it here, either, you know, either Ecuadorians or in the expat community. I really haven't heard it mentioned here. I will say that I knew a French woman some years ago from Lyon, and I was, I was talking with her about UFOs, and she was poo-pooing the very idea and saying, "Well, they don't exist, et cetera, et cetera. That's just absurd. That's ridiculous that people have these childish fantasies." And so then I started telling her, well, you know, there are many different kinds. People see spheres, they see huge cylinders, they see saucers, and some people see these big black triangles, at which point her mouth fell open and she said, did you say that people see big black triangles? And I said, well, certainly. They've seen them in Europe, in Belgium, for example. And she said, well, you know what? One of them flew right over my house. and, and so she described it to me then, this woman who, you know, a minute earlier was telling me UFOs don't exist. That's just childish nonsense. Then told me about a big black triangle that flew over her house. It was about 100 yards in the air. And it was about the size of a football field, a football pitch, and which is huge. You know, it's like 350 feet on a side. And that it was making I asked her, I said, well, you know, a lot of people have reported these black triangles make a low rumbling or roaring sound like a diesel locomotive, something like ron, 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 ron. And she said, yeah, that's it. That's the sound it was making, exactly. So, you know, there you go in France. And of course, the triangle sightings in Belgium of some years ago are very well known. And the Belgian Air Force actually scrambled some fighter jets to chase these things around Belgium. So, you know, they've been seen on both sides of the Atlantic, and albeit Belgium and NATO are both in the Western Alliance. And of course, in the United States, my guess is that either they are of an indigenous manufacture by the Western military-industrial complex, probably using a consortium of aerospace companies to create them in a highly compartmentalized, very well-funded black project, or the same faction within the Western military-industrial power structure is in close cooperation with an off-planet faction that they work with and may have access to the technology. So one of those two ways, I believe the Western military-industrial complex is either creating these machines or using them and carrying out highly compartmentalized projects that we know next to nothing about.
Have you had a chance to take a look at the photographs they've found of I think it was sonar. It looks like a Millennium Falcon at the bottom of the Baltic Ocean, the Baltic Sea rather.
I've seen that. I've read that material, or at least a fair amount of it, and I don't know what that is. Just don't know. My guess is it could be something from and this is a guess. It could be something from the previous round of high civilization, say from 15, 20, 30, 40,000 years ago, before the Baltic was underwater. And that then at the end of the last ice age, the seas rose, 300 feet, 400 feet, and things that were formerly on dry land were covered up, and quite a lot of the civilization that was here before was submerged. I think this would be part of the so-called Atlantis myth, which is our racial memory of the former high civilization that was drowned by cataclysm. Boy, who knows, 15, 20,000 years ago?
All right.
By the way,
did you your speculation? Sorry.
Did you happen to see that video of the meteor over Siberia looking like it got shot and blown up?
I don't know if it got shot or blown up. I think it just came screaming in at 40,000 miles per hour, and the aerodynamic forces are tremendous. Plus, as it enters the lower atmosphere, it undergoes tremendous heating from friction, and I think it just disintegrated, and what was one body just started spinning off chunks.
Oh, I know, but there is a car video that from a distance it looks like an anti-missile defense system hit it. In other words,
maybe
like a pulse weapon or something that's.
Well, I think it would have to be a pulse weapon because these things come in so fast. They're just screaming. I think it's really hard for ordinary chemical rocket technology to hit something going that fast.
Well, that's what I'm saying. I'm saying it looked like. Well, the reason this is relevant is that area is Russia's most sensitive nuclear, high-tech area.
Yeah.
And they're going to have their best defenses there, other than protecting, Moscow.
Yeah.
And so, if such a thing as a pulse missile defense system or whatever exists on Earth, that's going to be one of the 2 or 3 places you're going to find it.
Yeah.
And I'm just saying there is a car video because, Russian cars have videos in them. And that's what it looks like. And I'm not saying it's a UFO or alien. It might be a fake video for all we know, but it's awfully impressive to see.
Yeah, well, the video I saw was, I've seen like 2 or 3 of them, and I didn't observe what you're describing on any of them. To my eyes, it looked like a big chunk of rock or something screaming in from outer space. It came in real fast, and it was breaking up as it came in. They did fish a chunk out of one of the lakes there in Siberia last week, I think it was. It weighed something like 600 and some kilograms. It was big. And that appears to be one of the chunks. It looked to me like there were a bunch of them. The thing was it was really screaming. It was getting it. And it created a huge sonic boom that destroyed or damaged thousands of houses and injured evidently hundreds of people, I think. It was a major event. There probably will be more. I don't know. These people who talk about either our solar system being approached by a major unknown celestial body or some swarm of comets that may enter the inner solar system in the coming months or years. I don't rule that out. It's a big galaxy. And undoubtedly there are all kinds of planetary bodies and planetoids that are roaming around. So could something like that perturb the stability of this solar system or send a bunch of comets screaming in? I don't see why not. And the evidence
Richard, it's even worse than that because we don't even really know what the right model is for the solar system or the galaxy. I mean,
I agree.
There's esoteric thought that the sun is actually part of a binary system. And so occasionally the other one is going to come closer, and that's going to mess things up dramatically. And then there's the whole theory that actually the sun is really a comet, basically, and we're always in what's called the coma, the back end of the comet. And so we never really experience the other side. We're just being
Yeah.
pulled along, with the ride. Now, I'm not
Yeah.
saying that's true, but I'm just pointing out, um, we don't even really know enough to be sure about whether junk is ahead of us, you know?
Yeah. Well, personally, and if it is, I can't do anything about it.
Yeah,
If
for sure. We can't do anything. So,
if there are big rocks that are going to come screaming in at 40,000 miles per hour or maybe even faster, I can't stop that. And however, I will say that one of my interviews relating this to some of my underground bases research, one of my sources some years back um, told me when I asked him why are so many underground bases being built, he gave me a list of reasons, and one of them is that at the highest levels of the military-industrial complex, or maybe I should say, at the lowest levels, given the theme of much of my research, uh, they are well aware of the possibility of civilization ending cataclysm. They are well aware that there have been multiple global cataclysms uh, in the past on the Earth, and they are well aware that this could happen again in the future. In fact, is very likely to happen in the future. So that's one of the motivations. Uh, Global cataclysm uh, from meteors or from uh, change of the a change in the physics of the Earth's rotation, that type of thing. They're aware that the continents have not always been where they are now. They're aware that the polar climates, South Pole and North Pole, have not always been as they are now. Um, these are people who've read the geological record very, very carefully and have drawn the appropriate lessons from that record, which is that things have not always been like they are now, and that the changes can be very abrupt and global in scope, and can take place in a matter of days, not thousands or millions of years, but days.
yeah, I'm sure of that. I have a little aside for you. I got a chance to work with a guy who had been, let's say, number one in his class in the military academy for his country in Eastern Europe during the days of the Cold War. So he was on the fast track to being a general and all that when the communist system came tumbling down, and so he left and moved west. Um, and he told me, and he lived his life. He was of the view that he'd been told by, like the number three military guy in his country in Eastern Europe, that they were very sure that some celestial event was coming that was going to be very, very disastrous for at least a large part of the Earth. And this guy that I dealt with lived his life in that way. I mean, he moved to a place where, massive tsunamis, and I don't mean 30-meter. I mean 300-meter tsunamis and stuff would be survivable. And he was serious as a heart attack, and this is the kind of guy who would be number one in his class at any kind of school on earth you could put him in. Serious as a heart attack, and that's what he said. And I can't prove it. And I knew him back in the mid-90s, and he thought that the events would be coming around 2010, but he had no idea. They didn't let him know. He wasn't, qualified enough to be told this kind of stuff. It's just a data point. I got no proof of it, but it wouldn't surprise me that they would have some evidence of things coming, and it would be need to know. But anyway, he was arguing back in the mid-90s that a massive building program was going on, and including in Eastern Europe, by the way.
Building of what?
Everything. Underground train systems, underground, storage for food, stuff under mountains. And he's saying it was not for a nuclear war. That might happen as part of the confusion, but that was not the actual purpose. It was that some celestial events were coming, or at least a big one.
Yeah, I wouldn't rule that out whatsoever. And of course, as I said, my research has revealed that certainly in the American system, that at the highest levels, those who plan and design underground facilities are very well aware that this type of thing can happen, and that the impact can be global and in a very short period of time. We're talking like, 72 hours, that everything we know can be stood on its head with massive human mortality and just a drastic change in the entire global system. Uh, the type of thing that would just have people fleeing by the millions for their lives, just take off across the countryside, just trying to survive. And I'm not saying that this is imminently going to happen because I don't have any hard proof. I am only saying that it can happen. Those kinds of things can happen. In one of my conversations, one of my sources gave me a concrete example of that from thousands of years ago from a very obscure source that they, or at least some of them at the highest levels inside these compartmentalized programs, are aware of. They do have a good deal of esoteric or obscure historical knowledge, and they are making preparations without telling the people. The masses, I don't know, are regarded as ants or something like that in their calculation, just pieces on a chessboard to be maneuvered without being actually clued into the major agenda or the larger agenda, be it national or military, the agenda of the military-industrial complex or of the upper levels of the Freemasons. I really don't know. When behind the scenes, what is the ultimate power faction on this planet? I mean, we could speculate and we could guess, but I truly don't know. Are there unseen hands, unseen operators that we know little or nothing about? I would guess so, but I couldn't prove that, and I couldn't tell you who or what they are, other than to say that this machine definitely seems to be here, to be present, to be on the scene, and very active. And hey, what's happening with Fukushima is a perfect example. This alleged high tech that was developed starting back in the 1930s and 1940s, and which continues to this day, but which is, to my way of thinking, not high tech. It is death tech. Death, DEATH, death technology. And it's taking the planet down as we speak. The articles that are coming out of Fukushima are just ghastly.
Well, maybe the Archon theory is right.
Well, I think that has a piece of it. I've read some of John Lash's stuff. I've watched a couple of his videos. And,
Jay
I think
Widener
that's
talks about it a lot.
Yeah. I don't know Jay. I don't know John either. However, I think that, to a certain extent, the Archon material could fit in here. It's possible. I don't know that the Archons are this machine, but it could be, if the Archons do exist as beings, they could be a construct, and I'm hypothesizing here, they could be a construct of the machine that the machine sends forth to do its work as a type of facilitator on this planet of its agenda.
Makes sense. I mean, the explanation I've heard is kind of along the lines of it's sometime in the not so distant past, like let's say 6,000 years ago or something. This invasion occurred, and it's kind of etheric, spiritual parasite kind of invasion. So it's not something we can see around us, but it's more like those things you're talking about on the top of the head, draining the energy and driving things in a warlike, destructive manner.
You can't see them themselves, but you can see the effect of their activity.
Right. I mean, certainly you look at certain characters. I don't know. Recently, John Kerry seems to be a good example. I mean, they really look like they're kind of like a victim of a parasite. You know what I mean? A demon or something is on the top of the head, and they don't seem to have independent action. They've been so taken over by some kind of demonic, parasite or something. It's really strange to watch.
I agree with you. I think many, especially of the famous politicians, would fit into this category, or the big bankers, a lot of people in the entertainment industry. How do you explain a Lady Gaga? How do you explain a Britney Spears? Or how do you explain a Hillary Clinton or Barack Obama? I can conceive of them as being meat puppets. And in fact, Lady Gaga at times has presented herself as a meat being, actually wearing a meat dress, or I've seen photos of her where she actually has hung herself on a meat hook. She's just telling you, I'm a piece of meat in the service of something, some other entity or energy or intelligence. I'm just a piece of animated meat. I mean, the message could not be clearer. And in that respect, I conceive of these sorts of individuals as just that, meat puppets. And on the inside, there's something else, some other energy, some other force, some other intelligence, some other spirit that animates them. But in a sense, they are not natural human beings. They are bizarre entities. Let's just leave it at that.
And some of them look like it happened a long time ago, like in childhood.
Well, some of them may have been genetically engineered to accommodate these spiritual parasites or demonic entities that use them. If you're a demonic entity and you're not don't have a physical body, but you would like to intervene in human affairs, perhaps you do so by using a physical human body and getting sort of the normal occupant out of the way, maybe actually extracting them, and then entering the body while it's still alive for your own use. This would be a similar concept to the notion of zombies in Haiti, for example, when the sorcerers in Haiti allegedly send in other spirits or other entities into the bodies of recently deceased people to reanimate them. However, the reanimated corpse does not have the same spiritual inhabitant, if you will, as was there before its physical death. I'm not going to dismiss this outright because I think maybe it happens right in front of our eyes. And John Kerry is an interesting example. Vladimir Putin observed of him that, it's sad. The man, he lies. He tells huge lies. He knows he's lying. Everyone watching him knows he's lying. And still he lies. It's so bizarre that it's hard to believe.
He can't restrain himself. It's all he can do.
In
it's
fact,
all he knows how to do.
Yes, and Barack Obama's the same way, and Hillary Clinton, and both Bushes, and on. There's just an infinitely long list of these people. They are the types of beings that will lie. They're so devoted to the lie, they will lie even when the truth would suit their purposes better, and still they lie.
Well, that's what a lot of us have been saying forever. I mean, you expect people at the top to be corrupt, or I don't know. I mean, you don't expect them to be saintly in any way. But there's kind of like the phenomenon of people working within the system, massaging things to get results they want, but they more or less seem human, like you and I can relate to their strengths and weaknesses, right? But then there's this phenomenon of essentially zombies, like John Kerry, where, as you just said, I mean, they're dedicated to the lie. Their life is a lie. And even if it's in their interest to tell the truth, they simply can't bring themselves to do it. And this is what's interesting and kind of frightening.
It's very frightening. We're at a very dangerous pass right now on the planet. And, for a long time, I mentioned this in one of my recent blog postings. For a long time, I assumed that, true, there are immense problems on this planet, huge issues that we need to resolve and come to grips with, but that somehow we'll do it and life will go on, the world will go on. I no longer assume that reflexively, especially given the Fukushima crisis, but not only the Fukushima crisis, other things like genetic engineering. I mean, it's this issue of frankenfood, and with the new nanotechnology that's coming along, putting microscopic nano devices right in the body to re-engineer, to alter the human genome while we're on the hoof, so to speak, and the vast number of chemicals being released into the environment, the massive deforestation of tropical forest that's going on in Asia, Southeast Asia, in Africa, and Central America, and South America. The tropical forests are just being devastated. And now with Fukushima killing the Pacific Ocean as we speak, what I see is a planet under siege, and frankly, a planet that is dying. The rate of extinction is horrific, and of course, right now, no one is doing anything meaningful to stop it or reverse the trend. It's accelerating, and the human race is at the top of the food chain. We are at the pinnacle of the ecological system here, the biosphere on this planet. It's going down, and that necessarily implies that past a certain point, humanity itself, if things continue, will go extinct because we eat food. And if the food is all radioactive, what does that mean? It means we die, all of us. Or it means that there are such horrific birth defects in the babies that are born that while the current adult population or a certain portion of it may live, if there are such horrific birth deformities in the fetuses that no viable children can be born and survive and grow to maturity, then, hey man, that's the end of the line. That's the end of us.
Well, obviously the question is it that bad? I mean, there are a lot of other things going on, like the oxygen content in the atmosphere seems to be dropping.
Well, that's right. That's what I just told you, because the great tropical forests are being destroyed, number one. The Amazon region alone produces 20 to 30% of the free oxygen in the atmosphere. So can you live with 25% less oxygen in the air? I don't think you can. I don't think I can. But then you have the tropical forests in Africa, which are also being destroyed, and in Asia and Southeast Asia, which are also being destroyed. And then the plankton in the sea in the first few meters of the open ocean, the Pacific, the Indian Ocean, the Atlantic, the Mediterranean, Gulf of Mexico, etc., produce, I don't know, something like 50% of the oxygen, free oxygen in the atmosphere. And what we do know is that radiation kills biological life forms, and the Pacific Ocean, which is 45%, I believe, of the open water on this planet, is being killed as we speak. Fukushima is dumping radionuclides in the ocean like nobody's business round the clock for the last 2.5 years. Not only is it not stopping, it's accelerating. So I know you said 5 minutes ago, well, you're not sure it's that bad. I'm telling you, not only is that bad, it's worse than you have thought that it is.
Well, let me add, though, where I'm coming from. I think that it's bad, but I just think that the Earth or life may be kind of more of a, excuse me, metaphysical or mystical kind of thing. And so there can be, I don't know what you can call it, forces that we can't understand very well. And so if it were just a question of evil doing bad things, I think life would have ended on this planet, 100 million years ago or something. That's all I'm trying to say. I'm not an optimist necessarily. I'm just saying that I don't think it's a mechanistic question. It's not that X percentage of oxygen comes from the Amazon. It's more of a battle of other forces.
No. Well, it does. And this can be calculated and has been by foresters, for example. The rate of photosynthesis is known. The number of hectares covered with green vegetation is known, et cetera, et cetera. And actually you can calculate the production of oxygen if you know the within close parameters, if you have a good idea of the amount of photosynthesizing vegetation, temperature range, rainfall, et cetera. You can calculate, and foresters have done this, biologists, botanists have done this. You can calculate the creation of oxygen by photosynthesis. The same thing for the ocean. You can calculate the number of plankton per cubic meter of ocean surface, for example, and then you multiply that by the square kilometers or square miles of ocean surface, and you can come up with a pretty close calculation of the amount of oxygen production, and this has been done. So I don't live in a metaphysical realm. I physically live on this planet. And so do you. We are using physical means of communication here, nuts and bolts electronics. And while this machine force that I've discussed in my writings, and we've also talked about in this interview, is real and operates in a very important way at the astral level, the impact of its functioning is here on this planet in the 3D physical realm. And I'm not going to say this 3D physical realm is not real. It is. It matters. And it's why we take form in this 3D physical realm. It's our classroom, our school, our university. It's where we go through this life cycle known as human life. And so I'm not going to say, well, it all can be explained in terms of metaphysics, and metaphysics matters. I don't dispute that whatsoever. Nonetheless, I am in a physical body. I'm a spirit in a physical body, and the two happen together or coexist in this realm that we call Earth.
Well, Richard, I agree with you. I'm just trying to say that if we step back a little bit, okay, get away from, let's just say, the Amazon being cut down or the Fukushima, leaking or volcanically erupting all the time. I think you can make a case that this machine you're talking about, these bad forces, whatever they are, archons or demons or whatever, they're not up to one or two things. They're up to 1,000 things. And then there are forces or things that are slowing them down. Like, I think they really desperately wanted a war in the Middle East. And for whatever reason, they couldn't pull it off, at least not yet. And maybe not forever. And I don't think they're remotely happy about that. Looking at John Kerry or Hillary Clinton, I don't think they're happy one bit. And in the case of Fukushima, I recently listened to something by a constable from Australia named Andrew McGregor. And he's famous for exposing the stuff with the Port Arthur massacre, which was, of course, a false flag political event down there. And it got into a discussion about, there may well have been, not long after Fukushima, other attempts to damage or blow up nuclear plants in the U.S. with things like flooding and some other things. This is a complicated story, but I'm just trying to say there are forces out there that are trying to do unlimited harm, not just slowly cutting down trees here and there. But I'm just saying, I think that at the end of the day, there's this kind of metaphysical war going on. And, we can debate it. I mean, it's a tough call. But I agree we live in the here and now, and we got to deal with that. But I do think they're up to all kinds of bad that we don't even see because it doesn't happen. The nuclear plant doesn't get totally flooded. That kind of thing. That's all I was trying to point out.
Yes, and I actually agree with you completely. There are definitely countervailing forces. My point is simply that we bear a responsibility, and granting that there's this metaphysical dynamic, if you will, this contest at meta levels of reality that we don't physically see, other dimensions, other spiritual dimensions, that nonetheless we on this planet are in this so-called physical 3D realm, and we have a part to play as well, to cut down or not to cut down the tropical forests, to have or not to have nuclear power plants, to fight, to wage or not to wage nuclear war, to give our consent or not to give our consent to these things, to participate or not to participate. What I'm saying is that as of this point, my perception is the vast majority of, this is my frank observation, the vast majority of humanity is just along for the ride and is not actively engaged in what is happening on this planet, consciously actively engaged. My observation is a lot of human beings, and perhaps the majority of human beings on the planet at this point, are more or less machines themselves, just mechanically going through the motions of living, being programmed by their cultures and not deviating much from the cultural program. And there have been, again, Gurdjieff observed this, and other philosophers and esoteric thinkers have observed this as well, the mechanical nature of most human beings. People live unexamined lives in many cases. There are many people who will pass 50, 60, 70, 80 years without examining their lives consciously, just going through the motions that they are given by their culture. And frankly, that's not good enough.
Well, I mean, we can say that, but I mean, they outnumber us or whatever. They're out there.
well, look what's happening. The environmental issue alone is huge. I mean, you can observe it in just about every country I've been in the world, and I've traveled very widely. The mentality of a lot of people, and perhaps of most of humanity, is that the world is my trash can. People will drink something out of a bottle or a can and just fling it down, throw it out the window of a car or a bus, throw it out there on the street or on the sidewalk. They'll eat a candy bar and just throw the wrapper down, change their baby's diaper and just throw the diaper out the window, etc. You see this. I've seen it over and over and over again. So the attitude is the world is my big trash can, my big dumpster, and we're paying a heavy price for that. Walking the beach here in Ecuador, every tide just brings in so much trash. It's not only trash that people throw on the beach, but trash coming in from ships that are offshore, the freighters and the tankers that are constantly plying the sea routes up and down the coast of South America, up and down the coast of Europe, of North America, of Africa, everywhere in the world. And they're just throwing their trash overboard by the tons. The same thing with military vessels. There are hundreds or thousands of military ships from many different nations that are at sea. They do the same thing. And it's on land, on sea, we're
Hey,
just
Richard.
horrifically polluting the world. And the 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 issue is this can't go on because past a certain point it's so contaminated that it kills us ourselves.
Well, Richard, you talked a minute ago about this high-level consultant for the American system
Yes.
who you speculated why they might be doing it. Well, I would assume one of the speculations is that the Earth will get so trashed that when it goes into a collapse state, the elite need to go underground for 50 years or
Yeah,
whatever.
that could be part of their equation. Um, I talked to more than one person who worked at a reasonably high level with this underground stuff, at least in the United States. None of them mentioned that to me. Um, However, it's an apt observation. I wouldn't reject that at all. I think it's absolutely on the money. And in fact, no one knows past what point the ecology crashes so fast that it takes down not only large numbers of other species, but the human species itself. But what I'm not a biologist, but one of my graduate degrees is in forestry and ecosystem management, and I do know that population biologists know from studying many different species and forms of life that it varies in every species, but past a certain point, um, a, a biological population can collapse and totally wipe itself out very, very, very rapidly. You might have 1 million individuals in a population. The population might get smaller and smaller through disease or overuse of resources, contamination of its ecological niche, etc. So you may start out with 1 million individuals or 1 billion, and they may go down to 10,000 or 5,000, and you may say, well, we still have 5,000 healthy breeding pairs here, so they can rebound. They can come back from this. But for reasons unknown, you may get down to a certain 1%, say, of the original population, and then all of a sudden, within one generation, they go extinct. Even though you would think, well, there's still 5,000 breeding pairs. They can turn this around, but it's as if there's a switch at a genetic level or a spiritual level past and a tipping point past which the species decides, okay, that's it. There's not enough of us, so bye-bye, and they just go away.
Well, we just don't know.
We may find out. We may find out. It's interesting that geneticists have detected through studying the human genome in recent decades that about 70 or 75,000 years ago, there was some type of dire event. And our human forebears, the human population on this planet was reduced to about 4,000 or 5,000 individuals. Something happened, and the human race, or our ancestors, almost went extinct. There was a genetic bottleneck, and evidently all of us are descended from what would be the equivalent of a small town in the United States about 70,000 years ago. I don't know what happened. I could hypothesize. I have some ideas.
If you have faith in, mainstream science. But
I do and I don't. I do and I don't. There are some individuals in mainstream science who are intellectually honest, but there are a great many of them, perhaps most of them, who are not intellectually honest.
Well, my general take would be the genetics field is the modern term for eugenics. So, you know what I mean? So there's a lot of questionable people in that field, but then obviously a majority are honest people. But coming from a scientific background, I'm just going to say I think you get very kind of brainwashed into narrowing your vision down way too much.
Well,
And
sociologists call this domain assumptions,
mhm,
and sociologists know that all populations, all cultures and subcultures have
mhm,
what they call domain assumptions, which are just unquestioned assumptions that people who are in a culture, subculture, system, etc., make. They don't question them; they just accept them. It's kind of like the programming underlying or overlying code that guides their behavior and their thought process. And we're born into this. It's the matrix into which we are born. It's the rare individual who can rise above that or see beyond it. It's just the way we are. It's one of our great flaws as a species and leads us frequently to commit or to indulge in great error, even when the errors threaten our very existence.
mm. Well, if we could, I'd like to move a little bit over to a question that's relevant with you being in South America, and that is there are all these rumors forever of tunnels that go, practically from one end to the other of South America. And I'm wondering what your take on that is.
I don't know. I haven't seen these tunnels. Um, it's true. There are a lot of stories. I will observe that Andean region is incredibly seismically active, riddled with volcanoes from one end of South America to another. And also, there are a lot of earthquakes, I mean, big ones, and a lot of landslides in the Andes, where you'll have whole mountainsides you'll see like great gashes and scars, 1,000 feet long, a couple of 1,000 feet long, where hundreds or thousands of tons of rock and soil just come cascading down the mountainside and frequently cover up roads or railroads if there are. And then it takes days or weeks or maybe even months to clear it all away. So I would think that it would be real difficult to have a long tunnel system in the Andes that would withstand all of that seismic and geological activity year after year after year. I'm somewhat skeptical, is what I'm saying.
What about, say, military type underground bases in South America? Would they have the equivalent of what the United States has at, say, Area 51?
No,
Or
no, because these are very poor countries. You're talking about countries like Ecuador, Colombia, Bolivia, etc. They're very poor countries. They don't have the technological base or the financial resources to build these systems.
Yeah, but who's to say that it would be the government of that country that would be building them?
Well, that's what I'm saying, that the government of that country wouldn't be building them. If you had that kind of activity going on down here, you would have to have a lot of equipment, money, technology coming in from elsewhere. I haven't seen that. However, if it's happening, they would be coming in from somewhere else. I certainly haven't seen, for example, in Ecuador. I traveled in Peru. I didn't see the evidence there either of major American or anyone else's high tech or big money coming in or equipment, large numbers of technical personnel, that type of thing. I believe that preponderance of the high-tech underground tunneling activity is taking place in North America, in Europe, in Russia, and China, and also in Japan. My understanding is a lot is going on in Japan. Of course, in the Middle East, places like Saudi Arabia and Israel, there are very deep underground installations. I have heard of stories of purported deep underground bases in South Africa. That's possible. I wouldn't rule that out, given the deep mining expertise that exists in South Africa, the big money from the diamond and gold industries in South Africa and the heavy involvement of not only Israel but the United States and South Africa in the 20th century. And so I wouldn't rule that out, that there are sophisticated underground bases in South Africa.
I guess my point was just a lot of these, whatever you want to call them, elites, Illuminati, are sort of transnationals, and national boundaries don't mean a lot to them. So my question was, we know that places like Argentina and some of these other countries are heavily infested with some of these creatures. And I just thought maybe they were doing something there surreptitious.
Well, yes, and that's a good point. Certainly there are these transnational mining companies in Peru, in Bolivia, and other countries. Could they be doing or creating secret underground facilities without permission or knowledge of the so-called host countries? And yes, this is within the realm of possibility. I don't have any proof of it. I haven't heard or read anything about that. But could it be going on? Yes.
Richard, I think we had all these UFO sightings in South America for ages, right? And we know that the Bormann organization, the Nazi underground, used South America as really their, home away from home, so to speak, right? And the logic in going underground in the U.S. was going to be the same down there. You don't want satellites or planes or whatever to see stuff, right? You want research and whatever to be underground as best you can. So the Nazis had practically unlimited money. I mean, they stole everything and they had high tech. So, I mean, I guess I would phrase it the other way. I would say, why would they not build massive underground facilities in Argentina or Paraguay or wherever they were doing their stuff? I mean, if they're going to do it in New Mexico, which had very few people and you could hide things behind mountain ranges, I would think then you ought to do it in Argentina too.
Yes, and maybe it has been done. I'm not telling you it hasn't been. What I'm telling you is that I haven't run across evidence of that in my research, and that's the distinction. Certainly, there was a powerful Nazi faction that was brought to the United States after World War II, and Sauder was the from the middle of World War II to the end was the number one Nazi expert on underground base construction. After World War II, he was taken into military custody by the United States Army and spent at least 2 years and maybe 4 years, according to my research, in United States military custody. They debriefed him, and I actually have 2 of his debriefing documents that he wrote in English, or they were translated into English. I presume there was other material that has not been declassified, and probably a good deal of it to this day. Then he went away for a few years and then popped up again in the early 1950s in Germany, where he founded a civil engineering company that exists to this day. It is the company he founded in the 1950s, still exists, and is one of the best known civil engineering companies in Germany, right down to this year. So he had a real life after World War II. He collaborated with the American military. And actually, in my latest book, Hidden in Plain Sight, Beyond the X-Files, I include a couple of Project Paperclip memoranda that very explicitly asked for Sauder by name to be brought over to the United States under Project Paperclip to consult with the American military on their underground plant construction program. And of course, that underground plant or underground base construction program that started right after World War II continues to the present day. And it was interesting that they were asking for high-level Nazi collaboration and input on their program starting in 1947. In fact, the memos that I have are from early 1947 and mid 1947. So there was definitely Nazi input into that program. And in fact, as you observe, the Nazi agenda was international. It continued after World War II in very close, extremely high level collaboration and cooperation with the American power structure, the espionage agencies, military agencies, prominent universities, also major American corporations. And so a big contingent of Nazis went to the United States. A big contingent went to Russia. A big contingent actually went to Egypt. And then there were others who went to South America. So they didn't go just to one place. They went all over the world. And everywhere they went, they plugged into the highest levels of whatever power structure they were working with, whether it was the American military-industrial espionage complex, the Soviet communist system, the military dictatorships in South America, the Abdel Nasser government in Egypt. So they always worked at a very high level of the establishment wherever they went, and had a big impact on the development of technology and political systems in the post-World War II period. So, and the fact is that because none of us have worked on the inside of these highly compartmentalized projects, whether in Egypt or in Russia or South America or the United States, a lot of what they did remains unknown to us.
For sure. For sure. I'm just pointing out that in the case of, take for example, Argentina, Juan Perón was a very, very pro-German guy. He went to a German military academy. You know what I mean? They didn't have to hide stuff so much down there because they were, you know what I mean? They didn't have to be tricky about what they were up to so much down there because
and yet we don't really know what they did.
Well, that's because they're hiding it from the world. But I mean, they didn't have to hide it from the Argentinian military so much. I mean, I know they did, but you know what I'm trying to say. I mean, in the United States in the late 1940s and early 50s or whatever, there were plenty of people in the U.S. system, the government, the military, who didn't care for Nazism, right?
It didn't stop them from working with them, and it
right.
didn't
But they had to do it judiciously. They had to be very selective in how they presented things. They had to give false information about the Soviet threat, this, that, and the other. Whereas down in Argentina, I don't think it, you know, it was kind of like, we want to do what we want in this province or two. And it's like, fine, go do it. You know what I mean? They had
tell me that's any different. Well, tell me that's any different than what happened in the United States system. I mean, NASA was dominated by the Nazis in the 1950s. NASA was set up in the late 50s. NASA was dominated by the Nazis from the late 50s through the 60s and into the early 1970s. The American space program was a Nazi-administered program.
That's true. That's true. And
so it wasn't hidden.
With it.
It wasn't hidden, and it was publicly known that, you know, Debus, people like Debus and Werner von Braun, and there were a whole raft of others who were less well known, but it was absolutely known that these people were so-called ex-Nazis. It was out in the open, and so I can't say that it was any different in the American system. In the American system, they were presented as, yeah, it's true that 15 years ago these people were Nazis, but now they're all good Americans and they're on our side. And the people just said, okay, well, that's the way it is.
Well, I'm kind of coming at it from a different perspective. I'm not denying that, and I'm actually familiar with the rockets and missiles from family connections. But what I'm going to argue is, for example, you know the theory that JFK, the reason he did his public thing about, I challenge us to put a man on the moon and bring him back in 10 years or whatever, the end of the
Yes.
decade,
Yes.
is actually that was a calculated political move. That was to force the Nazi types to allow more technology out in the open. And, you know, in Werner von Braun's autobiography, which is only in German, the day before Kennedy was shot, Werner von Braun and Kennedy had a big argument, supposedly, over which propulsion system to use. And the only reason I can see for that is that Kennedy wanted the good stuff used, and the NASA Nazis wanted the fake stuff used, at least for the public display, not the real stuff that, you know, flies out of New Mexico or whatever. And so I'm just arguing that that wouldn't have been a problem in Argentina. They would have just had free reign to do any damn thing they wanted. Whereas in the United States, you had powerful people, and in this case, the president, not really being along, you know, agreeing with the agenda as they wanted it.
Well, but you see, it almost proves your point, doesn't it? That the president couldn't have been that powerful because he got his brains blown out in front of everyone while the world was watching. They blew half of his head off, so he couldn't have been that powerful. In fact, you could argue that. In fact, a lot of researchers have demonstrated that George Bush, father, George Herbert Walker Bush, had a hand in the Kennedy hit. And the Bush family for decades has been very closely associated with fascist and neo-fascist political factions in Europe and elsewhere.
Richard,
So,
you're making a different argument. You're arguing what I would agree with, which is that
yes.
when Kennedy was taken out, that was when the Nazi types took over the U.S. Totally, as opposed to 50%.
Well, what I'm saying is that they had and they have as much free reign in the United States state system as anywhere else. It was whether it's controlling the economic system, the technology, industry, the political system. There's been a pronounced neo-fascist, authoritarian, dictatorial shift in American politics in the, well, it's now half century since Kennedy was killed. So I would argue that, in fact, they are having their way in the American system. They're doing whatever the hell they want, and if anyone doesn't like it, you know what? Anyone, up to and including the president, they just blow his brains out.
Oh, for sure. I'm just arguing that in the United States in the late 40s up to the mid 50s anyway, there were a lot of people who didn't have such a positive view of Nazis. And so they had to do things in a underground kind of way. And I don't think that was the case in Argentina. I think it was a very pro-German place. And they didn't have to apologize for being Germans.
I think we have to distinguish between Nazis and Germans. Not every German is a Nazi, certainly. And I think the Perón government clearly was a fascist or neo-fascist system, and not only there, but in Bolivia and Peru and some other places.
Spain.
Well, sure. Franco was a vicious SOB. There's no question about that. But the issue is that Nazism, and I don't even know what is Nazism. There's a public face that's been presented. Not every German is a Nazi. And even during the Nazi period, not every German was a Nazi. Not everyone in Germany agreed with what the Nazis were doing, but certainly they were a powerful faction that took over Germany. And I would argue that while the American system presented itself as not being fascist, in fact, even during World War II, what Roosevelt set up was that was also red, white, and blue fascism. Tell me that the firebombing of Dresden or the atomic bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki or the firebombing of Tokyo, etc., from a moral standpoint, ethical standpoint, were any better than what the Nazis were doing. Same system, industrial slaughter of human beings, each side saying, but we're better because it's us who are doing it. We're the ones doing it. So by definition, it's better because we're wonderful people. And this was being said on both sides of the Atlantic and both sides of the Pacific. Is it somehow better when Americans burn 100,000 people to death in one night, or however many were in Dresden, 200,000? Is that somehow better than what happened in Nazi camps? It's the same thing.
Well, there is a case for that, for sure. Modifying the topic slightly.
I'm not going to argue. I'm not going to argue that American murder or American mass industrial slaughter is somehow better or more sainted than Nazi slaughter. I don't differentiate.
Oh, I don't either, but I just think that the debate is more like who starts something, and that's and indeed, the whole basis for international law after World War II, which is no longer talked about in the U.S., is that the ultimate crime is starting a war, because once it gets going, you all become, brutish animals. And so the key is to never start a war. Now, obviously, the U.S. has started plenty of wars, but I'm just saying that was the argument.
The United States has started more wars than the Nazis did.
Oh, of course, I understand. And the British, the Germans were supposedly taking over the world, but if you look at a map from that time, it's like, what do you mean? Britain owned, 70% of the world or whatever. Anyway, Richard, why don't we stop and take a break here? Thanks for coming, and we'll call it a wrap for this week, and we'll pick up this conversation next time. So thanks, everyone, for coming. We do appreciate it, and we'll see you next week. Take care. Bye-bye.